Hi everybody, hope you're all doing really good. This is Dr. Lilian Cespedes Gonzalez coming over with the second part of the Kristina of Norway project that I announced a while back. If you remember, or if you don't, go back and watch the previous video. I did say that I wanted to give you the experience of what my life is like as a public historian and as an academic by presenting you with the public history version of the talk, the one that I do for the public and that I had been doing for quite some time, and in contrast, by giving you an academic paper, just so you can see why we need to adapt one thing to the other. Well, obviously, I do not own a conference room. This is literally my living room. So I don't have all of the general shenanigans that you see in conference rooms in this day and age. But essentially, is pretty much the same. Just imagine a blank room, because normally conference rooms are purposefully built boring and ugly, just so that your, I don't know, attention level can really drop while you're spending hours hearing people talk. And the only thing that I'm missing really is a backdrop. Normally would be a PowerPoint presentation of essentially the exact same slides that I gave you on the public lecture talk. So what you're essentially gonna be seeing is just me reading from my computer, which is what I have the actual paper written. So this may seem a bit weird, but this is the way academia is done. You normally have a paper, you have it printed, unless you're a cool technological person, in which case you would have some kind of iPad or whatever reading from your screen this way, or even a computer like I have right now, and you would quite literally read. I mean, you're not supposed to like read, or some people do, some people don't, but the entire point of writing a paper and giving a paper is that you're reading what is written and you work with that. And in the classical way of academia, your paper is always going to be longer than your allocated time for speaking, which is roughly 20 minutes. So you're going to have to speed up through certain sections, which are going to be entirely at random, because they normally give you a 5-minute warning before you run out of time. So, we're going to try to not do that this time, mostly because I don't have anyone to give me a warning and I'm literally reading just of my paper. So I'm just gonna show you very quickly what this looks like on the computer, just so you can see that it's just reading literally 3,000 words. And then we will get on with the actual performance of this thing, just so you can really see the difference in information and the things that I skipped from Kristina, the public lecture and that. So essentially, you're just gonna be staring at me, staring at a computer while I narrate history for you in the most comfortable way that I can do this. I'm not your typical historian in many ways. I'm a bit more irreverent or not so serious as many people. So I try for my paper to be that way as well. But what I really want to showcase is that when we're given academic papers, there's a lot more technical knowledge and a lot more maybe dates, specific words, etc., information that normally I wouldn't necessarily bother with in a public lecture. So you can see the difference in there in the amount of details that I'm giving. So let me stop this for a second so I can show you the computer. And what I'm pretending is my paper, because I didn't print my paper, obviously. I mean, I did years ago and I could probably look for it. But in an attempt of actually saving paper, we historians have a bad tendency of actually printing quite a lot. I'm trying to save the planet, so I'm not. This is just my mock paper. These are my notes for many of the other lectures that I give, just so you can see this is pretty much how it would be done, like for like. So let me show you the computer screen. Okay, so quite literally, as you can see, I have my Kristina of Norway document right here. This goes on and on and on and on for a bunch of pages. I have my, those things that you see there at the bottom are my rough sources, because although I have a bibliography, since this paper is actually, or was not going to be published, or would not have been published in this specific shape, I never bother making full references. I have this very, very bad tendency of, even when I'm writing for publication, just doing my references shorthand, because if you've never had to do referencing before in your life, I can guarantee you it's just the biggest pain. It's just difficult and annoying, and it takes a lot of time. Often when I'm writing, I just want to get on with stuff and go with the flow. So I don't particularly want to be, typing R.C. Layton quotation mark, the meaning of life version 3100 et al. Journal of I don't know what in this precise moment in time. I just write something that I know is going to be that I cross reference, and then I fill them in when, if anything is going to be published, because believe it or not, a lot of conference papers are written but not necessarily published. People have a lot of tendency of recycling material, which is perfectly legit, but that just means that you just need to write something for the purpose of the conference or the topic, not necessarily for writing itself and then publishing. So there you go. This is what I'm going to be doing. I'm just going to be staring at this screen, at this ugly Word document, and reading this for you. So here we go. Okay, so here's where we're gonna start with this delivery. For anyone that has actually ever seen me give a paper in real life, I'm a lot more like my public lectures than what a traditional paper is like, simply because I just don't agree with the form and necessary pompous way of doing things. But this is the norm, so we're gonna try to recreate this as faithfully as I can. Every so often I will break contact and look at the camera, because otherwise my eyes may melt and you may die of boredom. The topic of Kristina of Norway is fascinating, but I am perfectly aware of the limitations of this specific thing, and this is the exact reason why I'm doing the experiment and the reason why I'm exposing you to this. So someone would have announced my name and my title and all of this stuff by now, making it all sound very fancy and giving me, credentials and due diligence where is necessary. And now I would start talking, and this is where we are rolling. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me this evening, actually 9 p.m. in the UK. It's very kind of you to attend my paper on Kristina of Norway, which I will be introducing you today to, because she's quite a mysterious woman that I would really like to get you to engage with and learn about. Now, when I started working on this paper, I thought I would be exploring the life of an interesting Norwegian medieval princess who, for some bizarre reason, got married into the Spanish royal family. I thought that such an odd occurrence would provide me with an amazing amount of research and perhaps allow me to construct a profile to integrate in my PhD. As you can see, the research was prior and the award. But it turned out that the truth behind Kristina of Norway and her coming to Spain was actually very different from what I had imagined. To begin with, I really struggled to find any secondary sources in English about her. There are a few more journals in Spanish, but all of them repeat the same arguments. I asked my scholar friends, both in the UK and in Spain, about her, and no one knew anything. Even the archivist in Spain told me, "Sorry, but we cannot really help you. Good luck with your research." So, as a foreword, I would like to make you aware that because of the lack of information on the subject, what I had to do to salvage this lacuna was to gather different bits and pieces in historical and historiographical sources of Kristina of Norway. Thus, this is how the quest in search for this Norwegian princess ventures into the oblivion of another noble woman that joins the long list of those buried within the text. As you can see, this is me breaking away from the screen. We like really buttering up the fact that we're doing something really cool that no one really should be doing or has been able to do, because unfortunately in academia, particularly in the humanities, you really need to justify your research if you're not doing something mainstream. So if I'm being pompous, it's because I kind of gotta. Anyway, here we go. There are some facts that we do know about Kristina. She was born as the result of the marriage between King Haakon IV of Norway and Margaret Skuledotter around the year circa 1234. And the next thing we know is that she was being sent off to Spain to be married. This union was to reinforce the Spanish claim to the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, but also help Norway enhance its position amongst the ruling dynasties of Europe. King Haakon had a necessary urge to display the legitimacy of his reign and ruling dynasty, and he had just managed to establish himself as the uncontested ruler of Norway in 1240, after the death of Earl Skuli, who had been his advisor and supporter in his youth, until the quarrel for power was impossible to avoid. From that moment on, he truly became one of the key players in the politics of Europe, stretching his business all over Scandinavia and enhancing commercial relations with certain Baltic towns such as Lübeck, or Lübeck if you're trying to be proper with my German. At that time, the court of Castile was great in power in the south of Europe, with King Alfonso X or Alfonso X as the person in power. Alfonso was lucky enough to rule the country in a period of economic exuberance, which allowed him to become a great supporter of the arts, science, and culture, making the Alphonsine era one of the golden ages of Spain. In addition, that was the time when the Spanish Reconquista had reached a fairly stable point, allowing the Kingdom of Castilla to recover and rejoice. According to Salvador Martinez, when Alfonso acceded the throne, it could be said that his kingdom was a crucible of cultures, and with his regard, he would do everything possible to maintain and fuse those cultures in all areas of knowledge and social interaction. Meantime, in the imperial career had begun in Europe. After the death of Frederick II, the conflict between the popes and the Germanic state encouraged any Christian ruler to try to enhance their status by finding ways to support their claim to the throne. And here is where the interests of both Hakon and Alfonso met. Alfonso's genealogy could be traced back to the German rulers, and Hakon's interest to expand his influence along northern Europe seemed a good enough reason to support each other through this unlikely marriage. In this way, Hakon's son, young Hakon, initiates a friendly exchange with Alfonso X el Sabio, the Wise, king of Castile, sending him hawks and other hard-to-get northern goods, end quote. You also say that when you are quoting a direct text in academia and you're saying that in a paper, you must say and quote and then end quote, just so people know that you are not just making this up, you're quoting someone else and that someone deserves credit. Also the reason why I was doing this all the while. Concerning Kristina's voyage to Spain, her entourage was formed by approximately 100 people. Amongst them, her father had sent the Bishop of Hamar and a Dominican priest called Simon, as well as some nobles under his command, Ivar Englisson and Amundi Haraldsson. According to the saga, many noble women came with them too. The gifts they brought to Spain with them included gold and silver, furs, and many other riches that were lacking in the Mediterranean countries. The trip that she took with her entourage touched on several geographical areas before meeting its destination in Castilla. The Norwegian ship stopped in Jarmouth and then in Normandy. The rest of the trip was done on foot or on horseback. After leaving Rouen, Louis IX greeted the party and provided them with a safe passage down to Narbonne. Afterwards, they entered the Kingdom of Aragon through Girona, where she spent Christmas in the Monasterio de las Huelgas in Burgos with Berenguela. There, they exchanged gifts. Apparently, Berenguela gave her 7 fine riding saddles and a canopy, just like the ones she used. Kristina gifted a goblet or a chalice of similar characteristics to the one that she had left previously in Rouen. And this is curious. All authors and even the primary sources keep on drawing attention to how this gift giving is of a generosity almost unheard of. So, if this was so outstanding and outrageous, why are there no further records? Question mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. This is actually written on my paper. Anyhow, the couple got engaged on Ash Wednesday of 1258 and finally got married on the 31st of March in the Church of Santa Maria la Mayor in Valladolid. This wedding was meant to be a huge celebration of almost epic dimensions. After that, the couple will move down to Sevilla to live in the palace of Viva Rachel, and her entourage departed back to Norway during autumn that same year. Unfortunately, poor Kristina died childless shortly after her marriage. It is said that her death occurred in 1262 at Seville. The Crónica Alfonsina, states that this was due to a heat stroke because she was not used to the climate, but some argue this was due to melancholy. Other sources relating to the later discovery of her supposed remains suggest that she may have died due to meningitis or some kind of ear infection, which we shall discuss in more detail in this paper. However, this is contested. According to Jensen, neither the Norwegian nor the Spanish sources are reliable enough about the details of her death in regards to the exact place and moment, which I guess is not extremely odd, but does not make much sense considering we can know every other stop in her voyage and full detail of her very grand wedding. Yet we are left to believe that the princess, with one of the most expensive weddings in Europe, died in such poor or strange circumstances with little attention paid to her. This is the moment when you look at the audience while you're turning your page, because I need to turn page once again. And you kind of pose the question and breathe, because you don't know how much time you have left on your paper. Take a sip of water from the glass that they've given you at the beginning of the introduction. A dramatic pause is necessary in every narration. Back to it. So, seeing as not much more information could be confirmed about Christine, I thought perhaps investigating her husband could be more fruitful. But I could not be more mistaken. The marriage of Christine to Felipe seems unlikely, but only possible because the rest of the contestants were not suitable. It has been understood that originally she was being sent to Spain to marry Alfonso, as he was struggling to produce children with his wife Violante. However, the sources are dubious about this subject. It's more likely to believe that Alfonso may have been interested in Christine's marriage to one of his brothers. Johannes points out that the sources lead us to believe that Hakon gave her the choice of marriage. Nonetheless, she was not really asked if she wanted to be married within Spain, but rather which brother of Alfonso she would prefer. Apparently, King Jaime of Aragon exposed his desire to obtain her hand in marriage, but he was refused by the Norwegians because he was already married and nearly 30 years older than her. Thus, she ended up with Felipe. About him, we know several things. He was abbot of Covarrubias, where the later memorial to the princess was built, as well as an important member of the clergy in Sevilla. Apparently, he had mentioned to the king that he had desired to leave his ecclesiastical career. Furthermore, Almazan points out in his translation that Felipe preferred hunting with hawks and dogs and would match a bear or a boar in a fight. He was strong, gentle, and good in social occasions. Of course, it has to be considered that perhaps this is just a way of masking the real issues behind the failure of this marriage. This could compromise both the political circumstances of Spain and Norway, so maybe Felipe was simply pulled out of the clergy with these pretenses for the greater good. This is the moment when you forget which line you've been reading on your paper, which happens very often, and you need to trace back. And normally what you do is this, you look very intently at your page and you continue. Thankfully for me, I have actually managed to find myself. So we continue now. Admittedly, from a pragmatic point of view, Felipe's best quality was probably the fact that he had no interest or easy access to the Norwegian throne. This was a cunning move by Hakon. He secured for himself a powerful ally through this marriage, while simultaneously he kept the Norwegian kingdom free from the threat of being supplanted by a foreigner, essentially. From the sources, we know that Christina asked Felipe to build a church dedicated to St. Olaf, and we are told that this wish was easily accepted. Now, Karl Alvstad has raised the concern that, quote, this might be the key to understand this Sverris dynasty, the family Christine is actually of, who claims descent of Olaf and the early Norwegian kings, and their propaganda to justify their claim to the crown, end quote. However, this church was never actually built, even though the Spanish sources suggest otherwise by misleadingly crafting this idea that Christine's wish was granted. This kind of idea makes us wonder of the position and influence that Felipe truly had in the court. Was the wish simply neglected? Or perhaps because it was a foreign saint, he could not sway the church authorities to perform her wish? In fact, the chapel was only built in 2011 by the Spanish association Fundación Kristina de Noruega, which was established in 1992 with the aim of perpetuating the relationship between Spain and Norway, using the princess as a mere symbol of their relationship. At this stage, it seems pretty obvious that the issue in here are the sources. We are terribly misinformed about Christina's life in Spain or otherwise, and even her own death. Therefore, one must question what are the strengths and limitations of these sources. The two main sources for Christina are the Crónica de Alfonso X and the saga of King Hakon IV. It has been argued by several scholars, mainly non-Spanish, that the Chronica is not entirely useful for this purpose. It has been asserted that the source is not dated with exact or remotely accurate detail for this period, or that at least regarding these events in particular. Almazan states her story is barely recorded in Spanish literature, both medieval and modern, which inspired him to produce his work. Therefore, this is another moment where the line is lost. Therefore, the saga is arguably more reliable. We know that Sturla was writing shortly after the death of King Hakon and was commissioned by the royal family to produce the narrative in similar fashion to Snorri's Heimskringla. Here, the bias is different as there was a clear political agenda. Nevertheless, her story becomes a mere pretext to write 13th century romantic story. According to Larrington, quote, indicative of the assimilation of the conceptual world of romance into contemporary historiography is Sturla's Machenhaft fairy tale account of the journey of Kristin Hakonsdottir to be married to Spain, end quote. This basically results in literary topos created by the exaggerated entourage and the courtly honors performed by Kristin as well as those paid to her. She is built like a romance character. Furthermore, Sturla makes barely, not to say any comments about her beauty, wisdom, and accomplishments. Ultimately, her fate was determined by the political pragmatism of her father, but the style of the narrative is clearly influenced by the French les and the rules of courtly romance. This is further emphasized by the popular belief in the area of Covarrubias, almost like an urban legend that relates to the princess and her fairy tale. It was understood by the inhabitants that young maidens that wished to find true love just had to go to the sepulchre of the princess and ring the bell located in the cloister of the church where she is buried. In this way, the aura of the princess was meant to guide them in such a quest and help them find true love. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, the secondary sources touch on Kristina as a pretext for something else. Be this the general relationship between Norway and Spain, the importance of the imperial career, the tomb in Covarrubias, or her as an extension of her father. With the lack of resources provided by the contextual record, one is inclined to recur to the help of archaeology. However, this will not be much help either. Jensen raises suspicion over the fact that the tomb in Covarrubias actually contains the remains of the princess. He argues that the contents are not accurately documented. There is no certainty that the remains are hers, as the archaeological and scientific tests were done in 1958 when the tomb was opened. It has also been noted that during this time of Franco's rule, the political agenda of his mandate may have interfered with the validity of these results. The only thing that seems to point to the identity of the princess is the presumed piece of parchment found trapped in one of the buttons of her dress. Supposedly, this was a note written in Alphonsine style with a prayer to the Virgin, while on the other side there was a remedy for ear pain containing garlic, wormwood, and plantago. These were not known as natural remedy in Spain at the time, but a Viking Age treatment. However, this is all lost now. And this brings us back to square one. In a sense, Kristina's story suffers from the general problem of lacking sources for medieval women, even when they are members of the aristocracy. Professor Ehrenfeld has pointed out that sometimes being a queen was not enough to appear in the sources, as her study of Mary of Castile shows. She states that the theory about queens and noble women always appearing in sources is wrong, and that they are rather often obscured by misogyny of the chroniclers and authors' agendas. Perhaps the reason why no further record is found about Kristin is because she lacked the power or authority than other noble women had. After all, she was a foreigner. She did not marry to a man whose area of influence was copious. It has been argued that the queen's peak of power was usually after the death of her husband or during the regencies. Considering that Felipe did not have an easy access for a claim to either the Norwegian or the Spanish throne, and that the princess died so young and without any children, one could take an educated guess and assume that this is the legitimate reason behind the obscurity of the sources. The other accessible route to power for medieval women, and particularly important for queens, was religion. queens in particular were the ones in charge of the spiritual protection of their families, which was very important for the well-being and prosperity of the dynasty. Perhaps with her desire to erect the church to St. Olaf, Christine hoped to find her niche of power. However, as we know, this church was never built, and therefore that influence could have never been acquired. Yet, as a final discovery, I encountered this one item that seems to have belonged to the princess and which is fairly obscure, just like her entire story. The artifact is known as the Kristina Psalter. This is a hymn book that belonged to the princess and that can be found at the Kungelige Bibliothek. There is much dispute about the origin and influence in the artwork displayed in the Psalter. According to Vidas, it seems to show influences from the art school in Toledo, but it also shares similarity with contemporary manuscripts produced in Oxford. It seems that the Psalter would have been originally crafted during the first regency of Queen Blanche of France, either for herself or someone close to her. So how did this Psalter ended up with Christina some 20 years later? As a matter of fact, Queen Blanche was a relative of Alfonso and Felipe, and as we know, Christina was welcomed by the King of France on her way down to Spain. Vidas is keen of the idea that in this process, the Psalter was given to her as a gift for her wedding as they traveled through France. She also states how, quote, these type of books were often given to another family member to commemorate an important event, usually a marriage or a birth, end quote. One could even dare venture, if perhaps as you can tell, it takes quite a lot of energy to do one of these, one could even dare venture if perhaps the previously mentioned chalice that she had given out in Rouen was indeed an exchange for the Psalter, in a similar fashion to the gift given between her and Berenguela. So, I asked myself this question: what was the purpose or the point of Christine? If we consider the 3 points about queenship that Larrington proposes, a clear image of what may have been her role becomes more apparent. Larrington argues that the role of a queen fell under the following categories: reproduction and succession, developing influence in the king's private sphere, and finally, quote, symbolic importance of her body in the display of the king's sovereignty, unquote. Her purpose was that of displaying the sovereignty of the Norwegian king. All the goods and gifts from her dowry are proof of this. Nonetheless, I would like to think that perhaps the evidence for the Psalter shows something else about Christina. I think this is maybe a sign of recognition and acceptance into the Spanish royal family. Her gift exchange, even though probably exaggerated by the sources, could be understood as really ritualistic bonding, even if only with other relevant females of this dynasty. Blanche and Berenguela established a limited but visual and permanent link with the princess, and I would like to see this as a sign of female agency, or at least recognition within the aristocratic female sphere. Perhaps if the Norwegian princess would not have been fated with a childless death, her story would be somewhat different, and not only the echoes of an intriguing political union in the European hype of the 13th century. And now my bibliography goes for about a page and a half, where I mention all of these sources I've been name dropping, like Almanzan, the Chronicle Alfonso, Teresa Ehrenfeld, Gordo Molina, E. Jensen, Caroline Larrington, Emerson, so on and so forth. And that is quite literally the end of the paper and how you deliver a paper in academia, give or take. Lily style still, because I need to add the drama somewhere. But this is pretty much how you do it. I'm sure you can notice some different approaches in here. I don't include, for example, the Psalter in the public lecture because this is pure speculation, and it really requires far much more contextual work than what I can do on an academic paper. The beauty in some cases of academic papers is that I can assume and it's an assumption because it's not necessarily the truth, that the vast majority of the room knows what I'm talking about. You may not know who Blanche or Berenguela are. They are queens from Spain and France at this moment in time, Navarre to be precise. Most people attending the seminar where I gave this were related to either queenship or medieval studies or whatever, so the names would be familiar. if I need to explain Deb Salter and who Blanche is and where Blanche comes from and why and who is Berenguela and why do these people matter, the public lecture, which is already, I think, 45 minutes on YouTube, it's already out of proportion and digging into, far too many different subjects that, frankly, I'm not sure they matter. I mean, they do matter because they add to her story and they help us understand what was the point of this princess, but it's such a circumstantial point of evidence. It matters to me from the point of researcher because I think there may be something there, and that's the reason why I'm bringing it up in this research paper, with the hope that in the future, or with if someone listens and cares about what I'm saying, they will be inspired to actually look out for it and bring it together. But it's the same reason why a lot of these characters just don't get their name in the public lecture, because I need you, from the point of view of the public, to understand who Kristina is and how her role is shaped and how do we get, to that moment in time, and also highlight things that perhaps are not so well known for people, like the awful fate of these women. Again, for academics to talk about, oh yeah, she died childless, too bad. It's almost like our second nature, but you cannot approach ordinary people, or not just ordinary people, but in normal conversation, you wouldn't make that statement, right? You wouldn't just glance over it as it's a known fact that we're just gonna roll with and just carry on as if it's just another, stepping stone on the story. That's not how humans communicate. That's just how weird academics do talk, because you have the context, you have the background, the research, and therefore it's okay to kind of just talk about these things as if they are vox populi, when they aren't. They are just vox populi for the 10 nerds that show up to this lecture, essentially. I think they were actually more like 15, but still, the point remains. This is the reason why I wanted to show you the difference between the deliverance of a paper and even the language. I'm sure you've noticed, although I keep a lot of my mannerisms in both the public lectures and normally the way I deliver papers, because I simply cannot be stiff like a, desiccated skeleton. There is a way in which you communicate within this spectrum of education than, otherwise. I do know that sometimes in my public lectures, I do use technical words. I always try to stop and explain what those technical words are, or, do some more digging. I spend a lot of time in the public lecture discussing, for example, the other Kristina, which I don't hear because my paper is not about the other Kristina. If you see what I mean, there will be someone else giving a paper about, the other woman. My focus as an academic view is this one tunnel vision. That's the reason why I cannot do this and translate it into a public lecture as it is. You need to filter it, you need to curate it, you need to tailor it to the people you're going to be talking about. And this is also the reason why I think this is a little bit counterproductive, because, at the end of the day, academia is great for the purpose of promoting knowledge and for actually, disseminating culture. But like I said, 15 people are gonna be at best listening to this. Well, now more perhaps, I don't know. YouTube and algorithms is one of those things. But the exposure that Kristina's story has had through the public lecture, in comparison to this, which actually just adds a few more details that we are never really gonna get in clear, is completely the opposite. And yet worthwhile. So that's the reason why the information is shaped differently. The PowerPoint is actually pretty much the same that I would have been playing if I was doing this, because the PowerPoint is just, again, a way of filling the void in those awful conference rooms that they put in. My PowerPoints, as you guys know from my public lectures, tend to be quite visual. They don't have a lot of text, that they are, mostly bullet points. I like people to engage with the story. I like people to listen and ask questions and, and take it from there. So from a visual aesthetic perspective, that's really the only thing that we're missing. But this is how the paper would have looked like, or how it did look like in the day. Just, me standing up and pointing and waving my hands instead of, waving the computer. And that's pretty much it. So I hope that this is of use to anyone. I hope that this is, if nothing else, interesting. I hope that if you're really, really into the topic of Kristina of Norway, and if you like the public lecture, hearing some of these other details on the paper maybe adds extra layers. But more importantly, I hope that this proves the experiment is valid, or at least to some extent, and that, you know, the two fields are important, but they are different. They are different for a reason. They both have their pros and cons, but academia needs to be a bit more aware of the way it does things, and the way that we can actually utilize that to engage with people without treating them as if they are dumb, which is the most important thing. The details that I've removed from the paper are not to treat my audience as dumb. They're just details that will hinder their engagement with the story of somebody who they don't know. And I know they don't know it because the people in the room also don't know who this person is. The people doing the research barely know who this person is. We do have a very bad tendency in academia, particularly when we're doing things facing to the public, as treating our audience as idiots. And I'm being as crude and as clear as that, because that is the fact, that is the truth. Hopefully, the tone, the message, and everything else that I've conveyed throughout shows that that's not the purpose here, but actually empowering you all with knowledge. Whether sometimes I leave names and dates out of the picture, actually for the purpose of simplifying that knowledge into a way that is more useful overall, rather than hindering us with he said, she said, quotes, etc. But at the same time, you know, this is also valid. It's a useful tool that we should be utilizing, but I do genuinely think that it should also be available to whoever wants to listen to me rant for about 30 minutes, essentially. So this is all for today. I hope that you can forgive me for this. If you're using this as an audiobook to fall asleep, I will not take offense at all, because I know I've been there before. And I'll see you in the next video, which is already scheduled. It's actually coming up in a couple of days' time, following up with Hist Club. So I'll see you later, guys, and take care. Bye-bye.